Anthony Soprano Jr., or AJ, might be the Sopranos' most misunderstood character. To a lot of viewers, he's lazy, whiny, or pathetic. The worst kind of failson. Born into privilege, unable to do anything with it, and constantly disappointing his father. But if we take a closer look, AJ isn't just a spoiled kid or a punchline. He's the natural end product of the very world that Tony Soprano built, and of the values that world is built upon. He's not a failure of character, he's a casualty. Because The Sopranos isn't just about mob life, or therapy, or the decline of the American empire. It's about the impossible expectations men inherit, and the violence that shapes them long before they even understand what it means to be a man. To understand AJ, you have to start with Tony. Tony Soprano is the archetype of traditional American masculinity. He's a provider, enforcer, father, and king of his castle. He eats well, drinks hard, cheats often, and kills when necessary. He's also deeply miserable. His therapy sessions with Dr. Melfi constantly circle around the same anxiety. Why do I feel empty when I have everything I was told I should want? AJ is born into that question. He's Tony's only son, his heir apparent, and the continuation of the Soprano name. But he's also a different kind of kid. He's sensitive, he's kind of awkward, he's too emotional, and he's not particularly driven in the way that Tony is. And Tony can't process love without control, or respect without fear. So when AJ doesn't fit into that mold, like he doesn't want to play football, he doesn't show toughness, Tony interprets it as a rebellion. But what's really happening is a generational collapse. Tony is a man whose identity is built on power. AJ is a boy who's been taught that power only brings pain. Every time Tony yells, mocks, or belittles AJ, he's trying to hammer his son into a shape that no longer fits in the world that AJ lives in. AJ isn't weak. He's just the first Soprano to see that strength, as his father defines it, is a lie. So let's talk about the word man. When people call AJ a loser or a coward, what they really mean is that he doesn't live up to a very specific kind of masculinity, the kind that Tony embodies. The kind that says violence equals respect and emotion equals weakness. But that's not a fair standard. It's a trap, and Tony enforces it violently. There are multiple moments throughout the show where Tony verbally and physically abuses AJ, and not in an exaggerated or cinematic way, but in a deeply uncomfortable, realistic way that The Sopranos is famous for. Remember the times that Tony slapped or hit AJ, or in season 6 when he berates him for crying over his girlfriend? Each time, Tony's message is clear. You're embarrassing me. It's never, I'm worried about you, it's, you're making me look weak. That's the heart of Tony's parenting. His love is always filtered through pride, and his pride is built on fear and control. When AJ cries, Tony sees failure. When AJ hesitates, Tony sees defiance. When AJ tries to show vulnerability, Tony sees shame. But it's not just Tony's flaw. That's a reflection of the culture that he lives in. The mob, like much of America, equates masculinity with dominance. To be a man is to control your surroundings, your crew, your family, and your emotions. AJ, growing up in this environment, learns that to be loved, he has to become something that he isn't. And when he can't do it, he collapses under the weight of it all. Now, the term toxic masculinity gets thrown around a lot and is often misunderstood, but The Sopranos shows us what it really, really looks like, a slow poisoning of the soul. Toxic masculinity isn't about men being bad. It's about the emotional limitations that society forces on them. It's the idea that to be a real man, you have to suppress everything that makes you human. Tenderness, vulnerability, empathy, until all you have left is aggression and shame. AJ is trapped in that contradiction. He doesn't want to be violent. He doesn't want to inherit Tony's world, but he also doesn't have a model for anything else. Carmela tries to push him towards religion, to college, to responsibility at work, but even she's trapped by the same patriarchal structure. She depends on Tony's money, Tony's protection, Tony's power, and Tony's influence. AJ sees that hypocrisy and it paralyzes him. He doesn't want to become Tony, but he doesn't know how to become anything else. AJ throughout the series finds out Tony is in the Mafia. He knows Tony has killed and ordered people to be killed. He's old enough to see the truth about his father, but he's too emotionally fragile to act on it, so he spirals. He drinks, he parties, he gets into fights, he cheats in school, he flirts with nihilism, and when it all falls apart, he sinks into depression, the only logical reaction to a world that's told him he's both worthless and privileged at the same time. His suicide attempt in Season 6 is heartbreaking, not just because it's tragic, but because it was predictable. Tony built a life where emotions were suppressed until they exploded, and that's exactly what happened to AJ. The pool, where Tony had his first panic attack in Season 1, becomes the site of his son's suicide attempt years later. The water that symbolized Tony's anxiety becomes the water that almost drowned his son. That's not a coincidence, it's a perverse form of inheritance from Tony to AJ. And AJ isn't a failure, he's a mirror to Tony. Every flaw in him is a reflection of Tony and of the larger culture that Tony represents. When Tony saves him from the pool, it's a literal and symbolic moment. Tony rescues his son from drowning in the same emotional current that has many times throughout the series pulled him under. But what happens next is even more telling. Tony doesn't change. He doesn't take responsibility. Instead, he worries how AJ's suicide attempt will reflect onto himself. He turns his son's mental breakdown into worrying about how his crew will perceive him, rather than truly worrying about his son. Because that's all Tony knows, control of the people around him. He can't love in a way that doesn't involve outside perception or his own control of the situation. And so even after the suicide attempt, everything Tony has done to AJ continues. AJ throughout the series parrots much of his father's worldview. He says things like the world is ending and humans are just greedy. And it's not genuine philosophy, it's despair dressed as intelligence. He tries to sound like the cynical men around him because cynicism is the only kind of emotion that's accepted from men. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Many fans judge AJ the same way Tony does. We laugh at his mental breakdowns or roll our eyes at his depression. When we do that, we echo the very mindset that the show critiques. We're doing what Tony does, mistaking cruelty for strength. People will often say AJ's pathetic or lazy or spoiled, but look closer. Tony's the one who kills his friends. He's the one who cheats on his wife constantly. He destroys every relationship that he touches. And at the end of the series, he's completely spiritually and morally bankrupt. AJ, however, just feels all of these things. He's what Tony could be if Tony would let himself feel feelings. And the audience's disdain for AJ says more about us than it does him. Because when a male character cries, when he admits confusion, or when he fails to perform masculinity in a correct way, we often reject him. We call him weak, or we mock him. But The Sopranos was never about glorifying strong men. It was about exposing the damage that they do, not only to themselves, but to their sons and future generations after them. AJ is that damage made human. He's the emotional bill that eventually came due for Tony Soprano that Tony promptly ignored. And in the end, yes, AJ survives his suicide attempt, and he moves on. But survival isn't the same as healing. He's alive, but he's inherited much of his father's numbness. He's learned to smile without meaning it, to go through the motions, to stay afloat in the same pool that he almost took his life in. And maybe that's The Sopranos' bleakest message. Not that toxic masculinity destroys men, but that it replicates itself generation after generation after generation, and that it's disguised as love, duty, and tradition. AJ tries to escape that cycle, and he does something that no one else in his family really did. He feels it, names it, and he cries over it. And maybe that's his form of rebellion, a small, quiet form of rebellion, because sometimes the bravest thing a man can do in Tony Soprano's world is to not become Tony Soprano.